Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to MDIC webinar on computational modeling and simulation. I am Jitesh Vital, Senior Program Director for Digital Health and Technology at MDIC. Really excited to have you all on this day for this particular exciting topic. Without further ado, let's dive in. So just a couple of program logistics. We really wanted this has to be an engaging session. So we are looking forward to hearing your questions and questions and comments for our panelists so that there can be a lot of discussions. So please use the Zoom's Q&A option on the bottom of your screens to share your questions or specific comments to the panel members as well as to MDIC. With that, our agenda for today is we wanted to give really a very brief overview of MDIC since a lot of new folks are joining today who are not very familiar about MDIC. And then Randy Schiestl from Boston Scientific, who is a panel member and moderator, he will talk briefly about MDIC landscape report on modeling and simulation and the survey. And then we will jump into the actual meat of our today's webinar, which is the subject matter expert discussion on modeling and simulation in the medtech sector. And we wanted to dedicate enough amount of time for Q&A. So please do send in the questions right away. And during the panel session, we may pop up a few easy polls to get a pulse of the audience. So please consider clicking through those simple polls at that point of time. With that, I wanted to give a very brief overview of MDIC. We are a non-profit public-private partnership purely focusing on advancing the regulatory science for medical device. We are not a lobby, advocacy, or policy organization. We work collaboratively with entities, whether it is government entities like FDA, NIH, CMS, MHRA, and so on. Of course, medical device industry and other stakeholders in medical device industry. When I say medical device industry, of course, diagnostics is also included. And then non-profit organizations, which include patient advocacy groups, providers or payers and academic groups as well. So we are a consortium and we are operating as a public-private partnership. We have about 60 to 70 organizations as our members and multiple subject matter experts across the total product life cycle of medical device. You can see, if you visit our website, you can see our projects are from all the way from the ideation of a product to the post-market cycle, post-market phase. So a really myriad resources being generated by MDIC for the community. And we have a lot of active working groups, programs and working groups. And of course, computational modeling and simulation is one among them. And let me explain or expand slightly there. So as I said, we focus on the regulatory science from a pre-competitive point of view. And so that all these different stakeholders, whether it is FDA or industry, they can all come together and find solutions for the challenges and find out opportunities, how we can advance regulatory science for the benefit of patients. So if you see here, we have programmatic areas or projects across the product life cycle. I have highlighted some of the ongoing project area. We have programs on advanced manufacturing, digital pathology, cybersecurity, health economics, and patient value, science of patient input, and so on. So a plethora of project and programmatic area. And the good thing is, most of the resources we produce are freely available for the community to consume. So we do invite to visit our website, visit our resource library, and take a look at our resources. And if you have questions or comments and wanted to learn more about us, send a note or reach out to any of the program staff. Just one or two slides specifically about the modeling and simulation program at MDIC. Our theme or our vision is to make available all this advanced medical technology safe and effective, but we wanted to utilize the adoption of regulatory grade models and simulation. Of course, many of you know that other areas like automobile sector or aviation sector has been utilizing modeling and simulation very effectively. I wanted that kind of approach or adoption of modeling and simulation in medical device sector as well. Our program at MDIC on modeling and simulation is led by a robust steering committee comprising of senior level subject matter experts from industry, FDA, NIH, and other organizations, as you can see. And of course, you will be going to hear from some of those members in a minute. This is a snapshot of all the projects relevant to computational modeling and simulation at MDIC. I'm not going to go in detail about all these projects, but definitely invite you to visit our modeling and simulation program page. And if you have specific questions or you wanted to engage with the steering committee or with MDIC broadly, please send us a note. Some of the projects we might discuss during the actual panel session. With that, what I wanted to do is turn the platform to our moderator today, Randy Schiestl, who is from Boston Scientific. He is also the MDIC Board of Directors member and the chair for Computational Modeling and Simulation Steering Committee. And along with Randy, we have Steve Levine from Dassault Systems, Brent from FDA. He leads the modeling and simulation activity at FDA, Jeff Bischoff from Zimmer Biomet, David Flynn from Boston Scientific. These are our panelists today. As mentioned at the onset, please do send in your Q&A questions for the panel members. And as and when we pop up some polls, please do consider clicking or providing your feedback. With that, Randy.
Thank you very much, Nitesh and Taylor, for your leadership of our regulatory science initiatives at MDIC. We're going to give you a few slides from the MDIC landscape report, which was published just a few months back, based on a survey we did just a couple of years back, and have now consolidated all of that feedback and conclusions, comparisons to the prior surveys into one document. Just from a top level, the survey that we've conducted in late 2021, 40 unique responses, a good mix of large and small businesses, 42% more than 1 billion in revenue, the balance all less than $1 billion. So it included small companies and large companies. And we've compared some of the 2021 results of the recent report and survey to the one that we did a few years back in 2014. Industry sentiment, if you look at the plot to the right, you can see that we have two peaks agree and strongly agree to three primary statements. In the blue, that is the statement below, modeling and simulation can reduce time to market. In the orange, as shown below, modeling and simulation can reduce risk of post-market complication. And in the gray, FDA accepts data from modeling and simulation to support regulatory decision-making. So very strong alignment on the value of modeling and simulation. Here we'll compare results of 2014 in the orange and 2021 in the blue. These surveys were very similar, not exact, as you'll see in upcoming slides, very similar, and you can see four primary areas of response where the participants identified strong value in creating a business case for computational modeling and simulation, including productivity, performance, quality, and other areas shown to the right, therapy development, research, exploratory, regulatory opportunity, and return on investment. Clearly leading the pack here is performance. Great sign from the stakeholders and respondents to the survey to say that with computation and modeling, we can develop better products, better solutions. Areas of computational modeling and simulation use. Here again, we're comparing the two surveys, 2014 in orange, 2021 in blue. And you can see the comparisons both based on the number of responses to the x-axis, as well as the percent of responses. And be aware participants were able to select more than one option when they thought about areas of use for computational modeling and simulation. And you'll see here, for example, in the top two bars, a strong increase, 69% compared to 57% in the use of CM&S for new product discovery. Similarly, down to the very bottom, you'll see an increase in the other category, 33% to 23% in the categories to the right, disease prognosis, test plan optimization, research, life science, therapy planning, software manufacturing, regulatory evaluation, and bioinformatics. So many items on the y-axis, along with all the other items identified by respondents where computational modeling has been used in recent years. Always interested to understand what are the obstacles to further adoption of computational modeling and simulation. And here you'll see, again, the comparison of the two surveys. And standing out there at the top is expertise. We still have a gap in the industry and government in the expertise, in the availability of subject matter experts to take computation modeling and apply it to the solutions that we are creating. Expenses, you can see that that is a little less of a worry, more respondents, but from a percentage standpoint, you can see 32% compared to 35%, where the expense of computation modeling and simulation still an obstacle in some cases, but just slightly lower than the prior survey. Uncertainty is a really interesting area. We get strong response, as you saw on the earlier slide, where we're seeing more adoption of the use of FDA, of simulation modeling with FDA and other regulatory bodies in our submissions for product approvals. But we still see some level of uncertainty in the participant response. Also, if you look down to the other category, we see a comment about no current best practice. And we'll show you in upcoming slides some of the case studies that are helping to address best practices and broader adoption and sharing of computational modeling use. Second bullet, less rigor required for experimental evidence. That can be true in a few cases, simpler products. But as we get into the more complex and multimodal projects, multi-physics projects that we work on in today's world, you'll see more and more adoption of modeling. Unavailability of high quality data. Certainly that's always a barrier to any modeling work. We need strong material properties and strong modeling properties, strong boundary properties in order to understand our models well. And a lack of evidence and supporting credibility. And I think that's an area where we're certainly seeing strong improvement from 2014 to 2021 with a bigger industry engagement, a larger industry engagement in modeling, and a much stronger acceptance of modeling results in our submissions. Organizations like MDIC have really contributed to that stronger partnership as we bring industry and government together in a regular format and project activity, joint project activity, in order to demonstrate the value of modeling and simulation. I'll show here just a couple of slides on the landscape report itself. It's available, as you can see, at the link at the bottom of the page. Contents of the landscape report include the background and promise of modeling, stakeholder communities, further detail on the barriers to adoption, much more detail on the survey results with all of the questions included that participants responded to. And then a nice addition this time around was the case study. We'll list those case studies, a sample of those that are included in the document. And just to look at the list here quickly, breast cancer imaging technology, patient-specific analysis of heart failure, in silico trial of flow diverters for aneurysms, CM&S guidance and standards, drug release mechanism and drug-eluting stents, and the time and cost of design verification testing through simulation. So a nice broad array of case studies that are available for industry and government to reference and learn from and leverage in their own work at their own locations. So a great opportunity to encourage you to look deeper into the content of the landscape report, all of the questions and answers and the narrative that goes with it. And then the case studies, certainly a strong indication of how computational modeling and simulation is being adopted throughout the industry. We will now go into our panel session, and we'll start with some questions to Steve, Brent, Jeff, and David in order to kick off the panel. What is the relevance of this report, and what are the key takeaways? I'll address that to all the panel members and start with David.
I think when you look at the continuum of where people are in the CMS cycle, right? You've got people that have, understand CM&S but aren't using it, and you got all the way to the end where people are using it for in silico studies. And I like it because it shows me where I am relative to the, to the two ends. It gives me a good picture of where everyone else is doing, and it kind of informs me about where I should be going next.
Thanks, Dave. Jeff?
Morning, Randy. I think I would highlight a couple things that catch my eye. One thing that has changed and one thing that has stayed the same. I found it interesting that the applications to clinical trial development and conditions really went up quite a bit over the past handful of years. I think this is consistent with what I see and hear in the industry. It's backed up by the information, but this is really an emerging area of in silico technologies that seems to be getting a lot of interest across the community. So that's one thing that has changed over the course of the past 10 years or so. One thing that, for better or for worse, stayed the same is that regulatory body uncertainty remains a very significant perceived obstacle. And I say perceived because I don't know that it's always real, but the perception also matters. But I think that also that indicates where we as a community need to continue to invest time and effort to try and remove uncertainty and also address the perception of uncertainty.
Thank you, Jeff. Steve?
No, thanks, Randy. So to me, first of all, it's a great compendium, snapshot of the industry. So if you're not currently immersed in this field, it's a great way to understand where we are, what the maturity is, and a great collection of examples at the end to give you really open your mind to what's possible. What I think really stands out most to me is the fact that modeling and simulation is really starting to move more towards, away from trying to replicate the bench test and more trying to replicate the actual intended use context. So to try to better address the translational challenge of going what happens in the lab to the clinic. And in the end, the use of in silico clinical trials or just more human-like environment for testing should really lower that regulatory barrier, something that we all need to get these innovations to market quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Steve. And Brent, as you start, I just want to really emphasize the partnership here that we've seen through the facilitation that MDIC provides with a regulatory science focus and the engagement by FDA with industry in this talking to this subject and adopting computation modeling and simulation. Your thoughts, Brent?
Yeah, I think to echo Jeff, I think two key takeaways that I saw were, the push towards more clinical use of modeling and simulation. In particular, that one category, there was a large jump in the use of modeling simulation for what was termed clinical trial development conditions. It was more than double from 2014 to 2021. I think that's pretty consistent with how we're seeing in modeling and simulation. People are pushing more towards clinical applications with patient-specific modeling. The emerging area of in silico clinical trials, I think, is really becoming a big area now. And the second thing I also noted is what Jeff pointed out was there's still a large uncertainty, perceived uncertainty, and was expected from regulatory bodies that dropped to some extent, but it's still at 61%, which I think is too high. I think we're doing a lot of work at FDA to try to address some of these issues so that next time this survey is conducted, hopefully this drops dramatically.
Very good. Appreciate that. Now, why is it so important that the FDA recognize computation modeling and simulation as potentially valid evidence? David?
I think many reasons, but I'll just give you two in the bench testing area. The first one is that we tend to make families of devices of various sizes. Like we'd have maybe 5 stents in a family, 5 heart valves. And if you think about the amount of testing that you'd have to do for fatigue testing to test all of these devices within a family, it makes sense to do modeling and simulation on all of them, find the worst case one of the 5, and actually do the fatigue testing on that one device. And if this simulation wasn't accepted by FDA, we'd be doing a heck of a lot more work. Another area is the area of is well developed for simulation is MRI studies on devices for heating and forces placed on devices. Again, if we had to do all that physical testing, it would take a long time, cost a lot of money, and simulation saves us both time and money, and helps us out.
And Dave, I know in our case at Boston Scientific, it really shows up in the ROI that we're able to show to support the case for computational modeling. Brent?
Yeah, so first, FDA does recognize modeling simulation as a source of valid scientific evidence. Currently, we know it's widely used in industry for design. We see it quite a bit in regulatory submissions, but we want to see it more extensively utilized. There's a lot of opportunities, I think, that are being missed. And I think we want to really push that forward and work together as a community, both FDA and industry working together through MDIC, and really try to move the needle. At FDA, we're trying to do this in a number of different ways in terms of our research. We really are focused and designing research projects where we can provide examples of how to do modeling simulation for regulatory decision making. We're actively involved in standards, most notably ASME V&V40, that's undergoing a revision as we speak, and working to develop guidance documents that some of you might have seen. We released a draft guidance for modeling simulation in December of last year that lays out how to assess the credibility of modeling simulation so that we're all on the same page, expectations are clear from our side and industry side. So we want to really push this forward. It's being used, but we want it to be more extensively used.
And Brent, I know in your case, we want it to be more extensively used by both large and small companies and reduce the barriers for small companies in order to give them the same opportunity of finding efficiencies in product development.
That's right. So a lot of our research projects are now geared towards providing examples of how to do it. So small companies can come in. If they don't have the expertise, they don't have the background from former devices, they can see how it's been used successfully in an open fashion.
Very good. Jeff?
Yeah, I would highlight two things. One is very practical, and another one is scientific. And in the area of just practical details, really echoing what David said, which is that in contemporary devices, and I come from a company that is focused on orthopedic devices, joint reconstruction, so that's where my background is. Almost all contemporary systems have all sorts of different bits and pieces associated with them, right? Because our challenge is to provide solutions across the wide variety of patients around the world. And so you have to do that with a lot of modularity, a lot of different sizes, a lot of different configurations. And it's not practical to test every single possible combination. So David sort of mentioned that, but I would add another thing is something that I think we have been doing in this industry and probably others as well is even before analysis, can you do hand calculations? Can you use engineering intuition to sort of help rationalize these sorts of things? And as we get to more complex systems, as we get to a wide variety of failure modes and patient outcomes that we're trying to understand and predict, we are incorrect on intuition a lot of times. And we really need to rely on credible evidence. And if we can't get that through testing because of practical means, that's where good, credible analysis can come into play to exactly determine what are these competing factors that can either contribute to or help remove the likelihood of an outcome that we want or don't want. So that's really the practical side of things. And the other side is with modeling and simulation as a form of evidence, there are things that we can learn from this tool that we cannot learn from other sorts of tools. We will understand things better. And to talk a little bit more about this, I'll reflect back on something Steve mentioned in response to the initial question, which is we are really, evolving from trying to understand benchtop testing to really understanding the clinical environment. And if we want to understand the clinical environment, well, there's only a limited amount of information that we can get from traditional clinical trials. We don't really understand mechanisms. We don't really understand paired comparisons because the logistics, the realities, the ethics associated with the clinical trials just prevent a lot of these sorts of things. And so modeling and simulation does provide the way to do that. We can, for a very particular patient, right, we can look at what is this configuration or this configuration or this configuration. We can really do that evaluation. We can look at things that we cannot look at on the bench because we're really looking at interactions now between devices and tissue If we try to do that experimentally, we're going to corrupt the very measurements that we're trying to make. These are the sorts of things that modeling simulation can do. And so those are the 2 points: one practical and one scientific.
I think when you mentioned the case of benchtop testing, at times we realize after modeling a simulation that the benchtop testing we've been doing for years has really not been very valid. And the insight that we get from modeling helps us develop better tests and better test plans. And Steve, as a software developer, why is it important that FDA recognize the validity of computational modeling and simulation?
Yeah, well, thanks, Randy. I can speak a little bit for the industry. I've been fairly fortunate to be able to work on a collaborative research arrangement with the FDA now for nearly 10 years. So I've got great visibility to the great progress that's happened, but still pretty significant challenge. So here's what we see, and it's mentioned before, and you just mentioned it. Over the last, decade, we've seen a lot of advancement in the ability to take modeling and simulation into that context of use, so that the companies, as represented here, the companies like Boston Scientific and Zimmer, who are using modeling and simulation, are ready to really try to use the modeling as evidence, however, so that they can actually move past the limitations of what you can do with bench testing and reduce the amount of cost, et cetera, and uncertainty in clinical trials. Smaller companies that maybe are not already using it are maybe not quite as advanced, but they're saying, well, before I get into setting up these very expensive bench tests and do first in human tests, animals, let me get the best design first. And if I can use modeling and simulation, so my prototypes are already advanced, it's a great use. However, when it comes to regulatory, these are great ideas, but if they still then have to go back and do physical testing, either at the bench or with the same powered clinical trial, they actually haven't saved very much in terms of cost. So if they can't actually use that data for as evidence in the clinical regulatory approach, they haven't actually gotten the full benefits because they're still back to the limitations of the physical testing. So we have to get to the point where standards like V&V are scalable, so everybody knows how to use them, can use them cost effectively, and so we can reduce those trials. And I think we're making great progress. I have to really a shout out to my colleagues that I've worked with at the FDA and the folks at MDIC in this group who've really made it possible. But I think we now really need to turn up the engine and get that scale up so everybody can benefit.
Thank you, Steve. What are the challenges for using modeling, and how can we overcome those challenges? Brent?
Yeah, in my mind, I think there are two challenges that I'd like to highlight. The first is that, demonstrating credibility of modeling simulation can be challenging, kind of in two aspects. So first, if you want to use modeling simulation for a high-risk application where you have to do a lot of verification, validation, certain quantification, these things are very challenging to do and time-consuming. So finding ways to speed up that process and streamline that process is a challenge that I think as a community we need to really work towards. And then also just going through the process of documenting the credibility assessment of modeling simulation, following ASME V&V 40 from end to end, can be challenging. There's a lot there to go through, especially for a person working with ASME V&V 40. So I think that's a challenge that we need to push towards overcoming. There's a couple of examples that are being developed through the working groups at ASME V&V 40 of using ASME V&V 40 from end to end. I think those have made a great strides to illustrating examples of how to do that. But I think we need more examples in different application areas, in cardio devices, ortho, neuro devices, and also spanning the range of different risk profiles, low risk, medium risk, high risk applications. So we have examples of how to do this. I think another challenge is
as we see modeling simulation being used more in the clinical space, is how to validate that. So often we have clinical data where the data can be noisy or lots of uncertainty, or we don't have quantities that are the same that we predict from computational simulation. So how do we use those data to validate simulations, I think is a challenge, because we don't have access to the rich data set that we can have, for example, from benchtop testing.
Thank you. I think the examples, the case studies, the draft guidance, all of that is really aimed in the right direction. And continued engagement with FDA through these working groups is a big benefit. Steve, can you speak to challenges from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I can't I can't reinforce, as you said, obviously companies, the amount of published literature now, while maybe we don't have 100% coverage of everything you might not find, it's really a great place to do your homework, to understand really how other people are using it. So you can understand, as you're approaching your unique mechanism, your device function, you can see what's possible. So first of all, learn what is possible to do, and then the industry. I can speak certainly on behalf of my company and others, and our service partners all offer startup packages, ways of taking your device and putting it into that base system, whether it be if you're only comfortable replicating your bench environment, although I would highly recommend jumping right to the context of use. You hear me continue on that. It's been my focus. So let's move past those limitations quickly. So if you can get that base system in place, that really gets you to the entry level. But then, of course, you have to continue from that. So you are going to have to really internalize this as an additional form of expertise with your bench testing team. You need to set up a small computational modeling team. I don't think you can expect to do this purely by outsourcing the idea. This needs to be a competency. So once you get that base system, which might cost the equivalent of a 1 or 2 animal tests, you get to that level and then commit to it, and then you'll find that expertise really grows. And of course, you have the resources. We talked about the working groups. The MDIC has a wealth of information, and so the industry, even the guidance from the FDA itself that was mentioned earlier, these are great resources, and the industry really is ready now, I think, to take you through it.
Thank you, Steve. And you led me right to the next question. Now, what resources are available for those looking to adopt computational modeling and simulation? Brent, can you talk about VNV-40?
Yeah, so I think VNV-40 is an excellent resource. There's a number of examples in the appendices that are excellent. We're currently undergoing a revision of that standard, so I think it's going to get better. Additionally, 2 of the working groups that I mentioned for ASME VNV-40, there are several working groups, but 2 of those are doing end-to-end examples of how to use modeling and simulation using VNV-40. I'm leading one of those efforts where we're developing a mock submission for a cardiovascular device that's being submitted to CDRH and being reviewed by a review team. That mock submission will be releasing here in the very near future. So I think that'll be a good resource that other people can hopefully rely on. And I think in the technical side, ASME VNV 10 and 20 standards are also excellent in terms of some of the technical details of performing verification, validation, uncertainty quantification. And then obviously the draft guidance that I had previously, hopefully will be a good resource here in the near future when the final guidance comes out at some point.
Yes, thank you, Brent. Jeff, can you give us your thoughts on resources?
There we go. Sure. So VNV-40 is a hefty document. It is not perfectly written, and I say that as one of the authors for it. There is room for improvement, and as Brent mentioned, we are doing some revision for it in many different areas. But as a way to practically understand right now in its current form, how can you use it? What is the philosophy behind it? What are practical considerations? We've been conducting a number of training sessions over the past handful of years at a variety of different venues. And that's a really good way to see the document, but also have direct conversations with people who have either helped to create it, so they really understand the intentions of it, and also folks who have reduced it to practice within device submissions. So at the upcoming, for example, the next training that I'm aware of is at the upcoming Design and Medical Devices Conference, which is in Minnesota later this spring. It's a half-day training. Again, a number of people who are very well versed in this, a chance to engage with them in a formal setting, and also have some unofficial interactions outside of the training. So I think that's a really good resource. Another resource is I'm going to give a shout out to some of the documents that the FDA has generated recently. So I think Brent mentioned the draft guidance. There's also an earlier guidance that the FDA published on how to document a computational study. And documentation is great, right? Documentation follows performance. But if you take a look at the documentation expectations from the FDA, that's also a very good roadmap for how to go start to finish to execute a computational study. What are the considerations? What's the process? Things like that. So I think that documentation is also a very useful guide for simulation. A couple other things that I would mention, and I think this has also been mentioned earlier, is that there are a number of companies now that are developing either general purpose tools for modeling and simulation, but also taking the next step and not just developing a tool, but instantiating a method within that tool to make it almost completely turnkey for a new manufacturer to evaluate a device based on a known problem, known outcome. And so some of these are MDDTs, which is another program from the FDA, Medical Device Development Tool. I think I got that acronym right. So if you take a look in the public domain, you'll see a number of small modeling companies that are active in this space. And so that's also a good place to go for adopting CM&S. And then the last thing that I would mention is, again, I'm a manufacturer, but as a manufacturer, my experience with the regulatory agency, particularly the FDA, is they're very, very willing to talk about these sorts of things prospectively. And so there are known processes for engaging with the FDA early on a variety of things that include uses of modeling and simulation. And so if you do have doubt, we log regulatory uncertainty as one of the concerns still. If you do have uncertainty, but you see the possibility of using modeling and simulation, we'll have that conversation early, right? Have the conversation about what you want to do and how you're thinking about doing it. Talk about it with the FDA, who are as well-intentioned as us to try and get good things out, and then see where it goes. And then you can go with more confidence that the pathway is going to bear out successfully.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeff. We've touched on this next question a couple of times, so maybe a quick first thoughts from each of you. What recommendations would you give to a company just starting out in computation modeling and simulation? Brent?
So Jeff just alluded to probably my biggest recommendation, and that's to come in early to FDA. We have a pre-submission or Q-submission pathway where you can come in and ask questions and get feedback early on in the process. And this is really beneficial, especially if you want to use modeling simulation for a non-traditional use case. So come in early to get your questions answered, to get advice early on, so that we're on the same page, so that you don't potentially go down a path that we're not necessarily in agreement on. So I think that's really valuable, and I highly recommend that.
Steve, what would be your industry perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, not to sound overly too forward, but I think the key is to get started. Get some help. There are easy ways to get you up and running, get your device, go from your design to a functional model very quickly. Now, the industry's set up. There are service partners that are trained. Universities around the world now have biomedical engineering programs, so there are eager students that are coming out that are ready to do this work. You could even collaborate with them, fund a PhD student to actually work on your topic and get you in the game. Because part of it is just understanding what is needed to be studied. And I think that's the key, is computational modeling. Your goal is not to replicate all the complexity of the real world. There's no point in creating a model that's an exact copy. what you want to do is have the simplest model that's going to give you the information you need for your system and your device. And so the key to get to that simplest model is to get started and then work with the companies that are out there, service partners, the FDA, and people like MDIC have a lot of resources and help you get to that point where you know which study is going to be most effective. And I think that's the key is get started and seek the help of those of us who are here to help you.
Yes. And Jeff, what are your thoughts on a company just getting started in this space?
So I would say somewhat flippantly, but then I'll back it up, is do it right. Do it right the first time. And what I mean when I say that is it doesn't have to do with technical complexity and these sorts of things, but put yourself in the right position with the right tools and the right people to do it. If you look at it as a very easy, low-hanging, cost-effective thing, but you're not using the right tools and you don't have the right, the well-trained people looking after it, then you're not doing it right. And what you're going to come out with is within the broader process, you're going to come up with bad results that impact your internal processes in a negative way that cost you time and money, or you're going to run into issues with the regulatory body because you didn't do it well, you didn't follow the established documentation, the established practices. And that sort of setback, if you are a first-time entrant in this space, that can taint you for years, right? Before you regain the institutional energy to chase after it again. So do it right. And what I mean there is make sure you have the right tools and you make sure you have the right people. And those tools and the people can be internal, they can be external. That all depends on the complexion of your particular company, but make sure you have those two elements you're bringing together well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What other projects is the MDIC supporting in the modeling space?
Yeah, this is, at least to me, one of the more exciting things that I've been involved in recently. So the MDIC, as many people know, really kicked off a lot of this effort nearly 10 years ago, working with the virtual patient framework, trying to create a new way to approach clinical trials where you can merge modeling and simulation data with clinical data, understanding where, when it's credible, when it's accessible, and lowering that barrier. So for the past 3 years, the MDIC has worked as a liaison for a project that I've been a co-PI with. In fact, Brent, Craven on the panel today is one of my co-PIs on a project we call enrichment, and that's basically putting us in the seat of the medical device company and taking a device, a mock device, and running it through an entire in silico clinical trial and understanding the process of going from design all the way to creating a patient cohort. So using a virtual model of the patient's anatomy to create the entire cohort, and then go through that process and have the FDA analyze exactly how they would assess the credibility. And the MDIC is playing liaison to the industry so that we're not doing this in the absence of their feedback. And so we're doing it in a way that this process could be implemented so that industry is telling us what's practical, what's reasonable, what would be helpful for them to know. And what's most important, because we're not an actual medical device company, is we're going to tell you everything we've learned. And the FDA is going to report everything that they've learned about how to assess it. So in the end, through the MDIC support, we're going to have this playbook, which will help people understand the entire process, start to finish, of how to create something like this. And so that's a really exciting update to where the MDIC started with the virtual patient framework.
Terrific work. Thank you, Steve. And Brent, your perspective on other projects at MDIC?
Yeah, I mean, I think the original mock submission work that MDIC supported was really, set the stage for a lot of follow-on work. I know that some of us have personally benefited from, because we're doing an additional mock submission ourselves, kind of following their path. I think that was a great project. The enrichment project that Steve just mentioned, I think that's going to provide a lot of insight for in silico clinical trials, which there's a lot of interest in. In addition to the technical aspects that Steve mentioned, we'll be releasing a playbook for in silico clinical trials here in a few months that came out of that project. But I think one important aspect of that is, going through that playbook, we'll go through like all the different considerations for to work through when you're performing a credibility assessment for in silico clinical trial. So there's some kind of unique aspects to that compared to, for example, bench testing to consider. So I think that'll be a great resource and it's a valuable contribution from an MDIC project.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
David, can you respond to the question, what is the publicly funded human body simulation models project?
Yeah, so over the years, many academic researchers with funding from NIH and other public institutions have created, many computational models and simulations, but it's hard to get at that data to find it, So what the team did is they created a needs assessment, which is a set of questions to find the models that you need, simply put. So the needs assessment has two paths. It has a short path where you can say, okay, here's exactly what I want. You fill it out. And it has a longer path that asks you detailed questions to help guide you along the way to things like material properties or anatomical models. And in the end, it's going to ask you if you want to be anonymous or if you want to provide your contact information. I'd encourage everyone to provide their contact information just so the team can get back to you if they have further questions on what you fill out in the needs assessment.
Very good. Jitesh,
Yes.
can you tell people where to go to take the survey?
Yeah, I think Taylor Metheny, our project manager, has just put the link to the SurveyMonkey link so that we can get a sense of industry's needs on specific models. As David mentioned, this is a very collaborative effort between NIH, FDA, and industry liaison through MDIC to do this need assessment and then come up with a repository or other resources which all of the stakeholder can leverage. So please do consider sharing your input through this needs assessment link. We have a couple of really important questions from the audience. So I'm letting Jeff Bischoff to take the first question. How do you see the application of AI in computational modeling in the medical device industry? Jeff.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of interest right now, as there is throughout the world in a lot of different sectors. I think there's some areas where we are actively using it to support segmentation and generation of patient-specific models. So that's one application that I think is already pretty well established. Another interesting application that I see comes back to some of the clinical studies that we spoke about, where we're trying to develop, models for clinical cohorts using surrogate modeling techniques. And so when we try and come up with a surrogate model for presumably a wide set of simulations that have been done, AI techniques can also help out with that sort of thing. So those are two applications that I would highlight within our space.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'll let my panelists to actually scroll through all the questions. But in the meantime, I'll go to Steve Levine for a question. Steve, I think you were typing the answer. Maybe you wanted to briefly elaborate.
On animal testing.
Animal testing, yes.
Yeah, great. Yeah, actually, that's an area that I think about quite a bit. I very much appreciate the sentiment. The question is, should modeling and simulation focus on replicating animal studies as a way of helping us move past their dependency on animal testing, or should we just focus on humans? And I think in practice, I think the best way to move past animal studies is actually not to focus on replicating the animal environment, because we know that ultimately you're not going to help with the biggest problem, which is the translational problem from animal models to human models. And we know many of the devices are limited today, I think, by what you can actually replicate in animal models. And so it's a good strategy that we've seen is to begin with models that are driven by the data you can collect from animals or already have, because that can be much more detailed, but then quickly adapt those models to human models and get right. And so put all your emphasis really on replicating the human environment and get that feedback loop when you do your first in human studies and things like that. And I think that so the best way to move past animal is to limit their use for validation testing, unexpected events, safety, etc., but not focus on continuing a virtual animal. Let's go right to the virtual human.
Thank you, Steve. There are a few questions, directed towards FDA. But of course, I'm not from FDA, but MDIC engage, we engage as FDA, not only OSL, and when we do any project with OSL, if OSL is the primary partner, it's not exactly only one individual or one division collaborating with us. Other offices like OPEC or review divisions or innovation divisions actually partner with us. Even with the mock submission that Brent highlighted, we had OSL as a key partner, but also engaged review divisions and so on. So I don't, at least from my point of view, I believe that FDA is beyond OSL. They are open to see modeling and simulation and reviews modeling and simulation as it warrants. Maybe Brent, if you wanted to give any additional perspective.
How OSL is working with OPEC and sponsors to support. Yeah. So I would say historically, also our Office of Science and Engineering Labs has worked pretty closely with our regulatory colleagues in OPEC and also industry, especially through MDIC. I've been involved in a couple working groups through MDIC on for blood damage, for example. But I would say recently, I would say that we're working even closer. There's a big initiative in our office now where we're doing stakeholder engagements, and some of you on the call might have been involved in some of those. We're doing a stakeholder engagement for each of our research programs, both internally and externally. So externally, we are basically having meetings with companies and identifying gaps and challenges for each of our programs that can motivate, basically define our research, and also internally. So we're working with our OPEC colleagues to figure out, in addition to the challenges that we see consulting on submissions, what are challenges that we don't see from a regulatory perspective, so that we can basically design research projects to drive down some of those barriers that we're seeing. So we're working even closer with OPEC and industry, I would say, than we have in the past, even though we have quite a bit in the past.
Thanks, Brent. I think this next question, I probably will leave it to one of the industry expert. What are your thoughts on challenges in developing accurate material models to be used in modeling simulation for the medical device industry? Maybe David Flynn. It's about material models.
There's a couple of groups. I'm on an Avicenna Alliance group that's now looking at developing consistent tissue testing for uniaxial aorta specimens. And once they get that consistent protocol that all the researchers are getting essentially the same results, they're going to move on to biaxial testing. So there is efforts, and that I think that's one of the weak points, right, in all this is getting accurate human tissue data, because the modeling part, physically, modeling bones and the heart is working out very well. It's the tissue part that we need to work on, and work's being done in that area.
Perfect. Thanks. Some of the questions were answered via text in the Q&A box itself, but I do wanted to close the session on time. Again, thanks to all the panelists for joining us, and again, thanks to all the audience. We had audience from all over the world asking wonderful questions, sharing a lot of comments. In our modeling and simulation website at MDIC, we have a link associated with the landscape report where we are actively engaging with the industry. So if you have additional questions and comments, you can provide input, and you can submit case studies and have more discussion with the experts here in the panel, as well as the CMS steering committees and working group. With that, again, thank you all the panelists. Thank you all of you for joining. It was a great pleasure, and we will look forward to continue to have more conversation on this topic as we move forward. Thank you all.